Lesotho, officially the Kingdom of Lesotho, is an enclave, landlocked country in southern Africa completely surrounded by South Africa. It is just over 30,000 square kilometers in size and has a population slightly over 2 million. Its capital and largest city is Maseru. Lesotho is a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. The name Lesotho translates roughly into the land of the people who speak Sesotho. About 40% of the population lives below the international poverty line of US $1.25 a day. History. The present Lesotho, then called Basutoland, emerged as a single polity under King Moshoeshoe I in 1822. Moshoeshoe, a son of Mokachana, a minor chief of the Bakoteli lineage, formed his own clan and became a chief around 1804. Between 1821 and 1823, he and his followers settled at the Butha mountain, joining with former adversaries in resistance against the Lifakana associated with the reign of Shaka Zulu from 1818 to 1828. Subsequent evolution of the state hinged on conflicts between British and Dutch colonists leaving the Cape Colony following its seizure from the French allied Dutch by the British in 1795, and subsequently associated with the Orange River sovereignty and subsequent Orange Free State. Missionaries invited by Moshoeshoe I, Thomas R. Borset, Eugene Cassilis and Constant Gosselin from the Paris Evangelical Missionary Society, placed at Moria, developed orthography and printed works in the Sesotho language between 1837 and 1855. Cassilis, acting as translator and providing advice on foreign affairs, helped to set up diplomatic channels and acquire guns for use against the encroaching Europeans in the Griqua people. Trekkers from the Cape Colony showed up on the western borders of Basutoland and claimed land rights, beginning with Yandawina, who settled in the Matlakeng area in May-June 1838. As more Boers were moving into the area, they tried to colonize the land between the two rivers, even north of the Caledon, claiming that it had been abandoned by the Sotho people. Moshoeshoe subsequently signed a treaty with the British governor of the Cape Colony, Sir George Thomas Napier, that annexed the Orange River sovereignty that many Boers had settled. These outraged Boers were suppressed in a brief skirmish in 1848. In 1851, a British force was defeated by the Basotho army at Kolonyama, touching off an embarrassing war for the British. After repelling another British attack in 1852, Moshoeshoe sent an appeal to the British commander that settled the dispute diplomatically, then defeated the Batloka in 1853. In 1854 the British pulled out of the region, and in 1858 Moshoeshoe fought a series of wars with the Boers in the Free State Basotho War, losing a great portion of the western lowlands. The last war in 1867 ended when Moshoeshoe appealed to Queen Victoria, who agreed to make Basutoland a British protectorate in 1868. In 1869, the British signed a treaty at Talawal North with the Boers that defined the boundaries of Basutoland, and later Lesotho, which by ceding the Western Territories effectively reduced Moshoeshoe's kingdom to half its previous size. Following the cession in 1869, the British initially transferred functions from Moshoeshoe's capital in Thababosio to a police camp on the northwest border, Maseru, until administration of Basutoland was transferred to the Cape Colony in 1871. Moshoeshoe died on the 11th of March 1870, marking the end of the traditional era and the beginning of the colonial era. He was buried at Thababosio. In the early years of British rule between 1871 and 1884, Basutoland was treated similarly to other territories that had been forcefully annexed, much to the chagrin of the Basotho. This led to the Gun War in 1881. In 1884, Basutoland was restored its status as a protectorate, with Maseru again its capital, but remained under direct rule by a governor, though effective internal power was wielded by traditional chiefs. Basutoland gained its independence from Britain and became the Kingdom of Lesotho in 1966. In January 1970, the ruling Basotho National Party lost the first post-independence general elections, with 23 seats to the Basutoland Congress Party's 36. BCP began a rebellion and then received training in Libya for its Lesotho Liberation Army under the pretense of being Azanian People's Liberation Army soldiers of the Pan-Africanist Congress. Deprived of arms and supplies by the Sabeko faction of the PAC in 1978, the 178-strong LLA was rescued from their Tanzanian base by the financial assistance of a Maoist PAC officer, but they launched the guerrilla war with only a handful of old weapons. The main force was defeated in northern Lesotho, and later guerrillas launched sporadic but usually ineffectual attacks. The campaign was severely compromised when BCP's leader, Ntsu Mokela, went on to Pretoria. In September 1981, the family of Benjamin Masilo was attacked. A few days later, Edgar Malomola Motoba was taken from his home and murdered. The BNP ruled from 1966 till January 1970. What later ensued was a de facto government led by Dr. Lee Buer Jonathan until 1986, when a military coup forced it out of office. The Transitional Military Council that came to power granted executive powers to King Moshoeshoe II, who was until then a ceremonial monarch. But in 1987 the king was forced into exile after coming up with a 6-page memorandum on how he wanted the Lesotho's constitution to be, which would have given him more executive powers had the military government agreed. His son was installed as King Letsie III. The chairman of the military junta, Major General Justin Metsing Lekhania, was ousted in 1991 and replaced by Major General Elias Fishwana Ramima, who handed over power to a democratically elected government of the BCP in 1993. Moshoeshoe returned from exile in 1992 as an ordinary citizen. After the return to democratic government, King Letsie III tried unsuccessfully to persuade the BCP government to reinstate his father as head of state. In August 1994, Letsie III staged a military-backed coup that deposed the BCP government, after the BCP government refused to reinstate his father, Moshoeshoe II. According to Lesotho's constitution, the new government did not receive full international recognition. Member states of the Southern African Development Community engaged in negotiations to reinstate the BCP government. One of the conditions Letsie III put forward for this was that his father should be reinstalled as head of state. After protracted negotiations, the BCP government was reinstated and Letsie III abdicated in favor of his father in 1995. But he ascended the throne again when Moshoeshoe II died at the age of 57 in a supposed road accident, when his car plunged off a mountain road during the early hours of 15 January 1996. According to a government statement, Moshoeshoe had set out at 1 a.m. to visit his cattle at Matsieng and was returning to Maseru through the Maluti Mountains when his car left the road. In 1997, the ruling BCP split over leadership disputes. Prime Minister Ntsu Mokela formed a new party, the Lesotho Congress for Democracy, and was followed by a majority of members of parliament, which enabled him to form a new government. Pakali Themosizili succeeded Mokela as party leader and the LCD won the general elections in 1998. Although the elections were pronounced free and fair by local and international observers and a subsequent special commission appointed by SADC, the opposition political parties rejected the results. Opposition protests in the country intensified, culminating in a peaceful demonstration outside the Royal Palace in August 1998. Exact details of what followed are greatly disputed, both in Lesotho and South Africa. While the Botswana Defence Force troops were welcomed, tensions with South African National Defence Force troops were high, resulting in fighting. Incidences of sporadic rioting intensified when South African troops hoisted a South African flag over the Royal Palace. By the time the SADC forces withdrew in May 1999, much of the capital of Maseru lay in ruins, and the southern provincial capital towns of Mafeking and Mohale's-Hoek had seen the loss of over a third of their commercial real estate. A number of South Africans in Basotho also died in the fighting. An interim political authority, charged with reviewing the electoral structure in the country, was created in December 1998. The IPA devised a proportional electoral system to ensure that the opposition would be represented in the National Assembly. The new system retained the existing 80 elected assembly seats, but added 40 seats to be filled on a proportional basis. Elections were held under this new system in May 2002, and the LCD won again, gaining 54% of the vote. But for the first time, opposition political parties won significant numbers of seats. And despite some irregularities and threats of violence from Major General Lekhania, Lesotho experienced its first peaceful election. 9 opposition parties now hold all 40 of the proportional seats, with the BNP having the largest share. The LCD has 79 of the 80 constituency-based seats. Although its elected members participate in the National Assembly, the BNP has launched several legal challenges to the elections, including a recount. None has been successful. On 30 August 2014, an abortive military coup took place, forcing the current Prime Minister to briefly flee to South Africa. Politics. The Lesotho government is a parliamentary or constitutional monarchy. The Prime Minister, Pakalitha Mosisili, is head of government and has executive authority. The King of Lesotho, Letsie III, serves a largely ceremonial function. He no longer possesses any executive authority and is prohibited from actively participating in political initiatives. The Democratic Congress leads a coalition government in the National Assembly, the lower house of parliament. The upper house of parliament, called the Senate, is composed of 22 principal chiefs whose membership is hereditary, and 11 appointees of the king, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Constitution provides for an independent judicial system, made up of the High Court, the Court of Appeal, magistrates' courts, and traditional courts that exist predominantly in rural areas. All but one of the justices on the Court of Appeal are South African jurists. There is no trial by jury, rather, judges make rulings alone or, in the case of criminal trials, with 2 other judges as observers. The Constitution also protects basic civil liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of the press, freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of religion. Lesotho was ranked 12th out of 48 sub-Saharan African countries in the 2008 Ibrahim Index of African Governance. As of 2010, the People's Charter movement called for the practical annexation of the country by South Africa due to the AIDS epidemic. Nearly a quarter of the population is infected with HIV. The country faced high unemployment, economic collapse, a weak currency and poor travel documents restricting movement. An African Union report called for economic integration of Lesotho with South Africa but stopped short of suggesting annexation. In May 2010, the Charter movement delivered a petition to the South African High Commission requesting integration. South Africa's Home Affairs spokesman Ronnie Mamoepa rejected the idea that Lesotho should be treated as a special case. It is a sovereign country like South Africa. We sent envoys to our neighbors, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Swaziland and Lesotho, before we enforce the passport rule. When you travel from Britain to South Africa, don't you expect to use a passport? Foreign relations. Lesotho's geographic location makes it extremely vulnerable to political and economic Developments in South Africa. It is a member of many regional economic organizations, including the Southern African Development Community and the Southern African Customs Union. It is also active in the United Nations, the African Union, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Commonwealth, and many other international organizations. Prince Siasa Hire or Siasa is the present High Commissioner of the Kingdom of Lesotho to the Court of St. James's. The UN is represented by a resident mission as well, including UNDP, UNICEF, WHO, FAO, WFP, UNFPA and UNAIDS. Lesotho also has maintained ties with the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States and other Western states. Although in 1990 it broke relations with the People's Republic of China and re-established relations with the Republic of China, it later restored ties with the PRC. Lesotho also recognizes the State of Palestine and the Republic of Kosovo. In the past, it was a strong public opponent of apartheid in South Africa and granted a number of South African refugees political asylum during the apartheid era. Lesotho does not have a single code containing its laws. It draws them from a variety of sources including constitution, legislation, common law, judicial precedent, customary law, and authoritative texts. The Constitution of Lesotho came into force after the publication of the Commencement Order. Constitutionally, legislation refers to laws that have been passed by both houses of Parliament and have been assented to by the King. Subordinate legislation refers to laws passed by other bodies to which Parliament has by virtue of Section 70 of the Constitution validly delegated such legislative powers. These include government publications, ministerial orders, ministerial regulations and municipal bylaws. Although Lesotho shares with South Africa, Botswana, Swaziland, Namibia and Zimbabwe a mixed general legal system which resulted from the interaction between the Roman Dutch civilian law and the English common law, its general law operates independently. Lesotho also applies the common law, which refers to unwritten law or from non-statutory sources, but excludes customary law. Decisions from South African courts are only persuasive, and courts refer to them in formulating their decisions. Decisions from similar jurisdictions can also be cited for their persuasive value. Magistrates' courts' decisions do not become precedent since these are lower courts. They are however bound by decisions of the High Court and the Court of Appeal. At the apex of the Lesotho justice system is the Court of Appeal, which is the final appellate forum on all matters. It has a supervisory and review jurisdiction over all the courts of Lesotho. Lesotho has a dual legal system consisting of customary and general laws operating side by side. Customary law is made up of the customs of the Basotho, written and codified in the laws of Lesotho, whereas general law consists of Roman Dutch law imported from the Cape and the Lesotho statutes. The codification of customary law came about after a council was appointed in 1903 to advise the British Resident Commissioner on what was best for the Basotho in terms of laws that would govern them. Until this time, the Basotho customs and laws were passed down from generation to generation through oral tradition. The council was then given the task of codifying them, came up with the laws of Lesotho which are applied by customary courts today. Written works of eminent authors have persuasive value in the courts of Lesotho. These include writings of the old authorities as well as contemporary writers from similar jurisdictions. Districts for administrative purposes. Lesotho is divided into 10 districts, each headed by a district administrator. Each district has a capital known as a camp town. The districts are further subdivided into 80 constituencies, which consist of 129 local community councils. Geography. Lesotho covers 30,355 square kilometers. It is the only independent state in the world that lies entirely above 1,000 meters in elevation. Its lowest point of 1,400 meters is thus the highest in the world. Over 80% of the country lies above 1,800 meters. Lesotho is also the southernmost landlocked country in the world and is entirely surrounded by South Africa. It lies between latitudes 28 degrees and 31 degrees south, and longitudes 27 degrees and 30 degrees east. Climate. Because of its altitude, Lesotho remains cooler throughout the year than other regions at the same latitude. Most of the rain falls as summer thunderstorms. Maseru and surrounding lowlands often reach 30 degrees Celsius in summer. Winters can be cold, with the lowlands getting down to -7 degrees Celsius and the highlands to -18 degrees Celsius at times. Snow is common in the highlands between May and September. The higher peaks can experience snowfalls year-round.